Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the 7th annual Working in the Think Tank Sector Outreach event. So I hope that you're here because you want to learn all about working in a think tank. I'm Ruth Curtis. I'm Chief Executive of the Resolution Foundation, but this event is not a Resolution Foundation event. It's a collaboration between a huge number of think tanks, all of whom are really committed to broadening the diversity in our sector, and we're really happy that you're joining us today so that we can hopefully demystify some of what a think tank is and what it's like to work in one. But it's great that you're here and that you're potentially interested in joining us. We would love to have you. This event aims to widen access, as I say, to think tank careers, and we're going to have 3 panels to help you do that. The first will be led by HR teams at various think tanks to help you understand things like what applying for a job in a think tank might involve. Second, we'll have a session on influencing policy, which is a lot of what think tanks try and do, and then we'll finish with a day in the life of a researcher. And as I'll talk about in a minute, there are lots of different jobs in think tanks, but today's event is especially focused on our research teams and on people who might want to join our research teams, but you will be very welcome to all of our teams. So I will start by telling you a little bit about think tanks overall and trying to explain what we do. I only joined the think tank sector a year ago. I joined the Resolution Foundation a year ago. Before that, I was a civil servant for all of my career. So some of this is new to me. So I hope that means that I can explain it a bit more from the perspective of an outsider, but I've also learned a lot myself over the last year about think tanks, and so I know that it can be quite a bamboozling word. And indeed, think tank is a very strange word, isn't it? I remember doing a module in philosophy when I was at university, and we had to do an essay about brains in vats, and think tanks always reminds me of that. It sounds very, very strange. So we want to try and explain to you what we actually do. We're called think tanks, I guess, because a lot of what we do is coming up with ideas, and we have a bit more space than perhaps other people like government ministers working on public policy to think. So that's why think is in our title. But in essence, we're all in different ways trying to make the world better through public policy. And we do that firstly, as it says here, by identifying problems. So a lot of what our teams do is looking into the data, what's really going on, what does the evidence really tell us about for a particular policy problem, what might work. And then we'll use that evidence to suggest solutions, to make specific recommendations for how policy could change. That might be based on the evidence that's available. It might be based on new ideas that we've generated. We might get a collection of experts together and see what ideas we can develop from that. And then finally, persuade others to adopt solutions. So it's not just about sitting in our offices and thinking about what might be best. Most of us are here because we're motivated, as I say, to try and make things better. And we only do that when we persuade others to adopt solutions. And different think tanks might take slightly different approaches to all 3 of these. And some think tanks might spend most of their time identifying problems. So if you're someone who really loves digging into numbers, that might be the kind of think tank that really suits you. Some will spend more of their time on campaigning, on persuasion, and if you're really motivated by that, that might be a good place for you. Just quickly to put think tanks in the wider kind of system in which we operate. If you're someone who's interested in public policy, there might be quite a lot of these organisations that appeal to you. And at the end of the day, there's a whole ecosystem trying to influence decision makers, often government ministers. Sometimes it might be head of an independent body or your local government, but trying to influence those decision makers either directly or through the people that they listen to, what they read in the newspapers, what they hear when they talk to their constituents, and the advice they get from their civil servants. So there's a number of organisations that try and do that, of which think tanks are just one. You might hear about other organisations like I met today with the CBI, which are a business representation organisation. So there are other organisations where they take the interests of a particular sector or a collection of businesses and try and represent them. There are obviously trade unions which represent the views of their members as employees. There are charities who might have particular missions. But the thing that's really unique about think tanks is that we'll normally have a kind of thing, a particular area that we're interested in or a mission we're trying to achieve, and we're trying to come up with ideas not for a collection of members, but for those who our mission talks to. Who works in think tanks? So as I said, quite a lot of think tanks will have quite a big research team, because those are the people who generate new evidence, who are coming up with new ideas. Some of those people might be economists, but absolutely not all of them. We also have social researchers, policy experts, statisticians, qualitative analysts. So a whole range of research skills can be relevant to a think tank. And like any organisation, we need excellent operations teams to help us work well. And then we have communications and external affairs teams who are really key to that section that we talked about in terms of influencing and persuading. So they're the people who write our press notices, organise our events. They might also be in Parliament talking to MPs, depending on the organisation and how it operates. So as I said, what think tanks are really here to do is to try and change the world, whether that's for a better tax system, or here at Resolution Foundation for living standards, or to improve work conditions. And we do that in different ways. So we've talked a bit about coming up with policy ideas. That's sometimes the most obvious kind of product of a think tank. But there are others too. So the first one here is about influence the terms of the debate. So the way that issues are framed in the media can have a really big effect on how they're perceived. There can be misunderstandings about what's really going on in the economy or in people's lives. And so we try not just to have ideas, but also to influence the terms of the debate. We might provide intellectual ammunition, so there might be politicians or media organisations who share our perspective or like our ideas, but they also have people that they need to persuade, and so we try and provide research that helps them make the case as well as us. We might create policy blueprints. So I think we see quite a lot of this at the moment, that there might be areas where actually there's some political consensus about what needs to happen, maybe build more houses, but there's quite a lot of challenges in how a government delivers that. And one thing a think tank can do is say, well, this is really what seems to be stopping more houses being built, and here's some things you could do to address that problem. And the more granular that we can be, the more likely we are to influence government. And then finally, build networks and coalitions. So sometimes making things better can also be about just making the system work a bit better. And some think tanks focus on how can government work better, for example. So we try and bring experts together and share ideas, and see through that how we can improve the world. So I asked some friends to help me with why it's great to work in a think tank, and I thought I would share those with you so you don't just hear from me today. So the first quote is from Anna Menon. He runs UK in a Changing Europe, and he says, having the freedom to think and veer your thinking to try and influence the way other people think about the key issues facing the country is simply a privilege. It's also great fun. And then Hannah White from the Institute for Government says it's a great job because we're very mission-driven organisations full of interesting, motivated people, committed to thinking creatively about solutions to important problems and generally making the world a better place. And then finally, we have you get to use your imagination to solve problems and make people's lives better. It's also exciting being so close to the heart of government and politics, and that's from Polly Curtis, who runs Demos. So I hope that you can see that through those quotes, some of the themes that come out are we're quite fun places to work. We're often people all motivated by similar things, but with diverse backgrounds, and generally people who choose to spend their time trying to make things better, I think, leads to a really nice working environment. We're focused on solving problems and having impact, and so if you're someone who's motivated by not just kind of discovering new things, but seeing how governments can use them and having impact with your work, then that's something that a think tank can definitely deliver. Yes, I think Anand's point about the freedom to think is really important too, compared to being in the civil service where I was before, and I would also recommend a career in the civil service. You have the advantage that the stuff you're doing is direct for the government, and so that impact is very immediate, but you have less freedom. So what I'm really enjoying about a think tank is the freedom to work out what I think about an issue and to say that, whereas the civil service is about implementing what the government wants. I thought I would try and bring this to life with just some examples of different work think tanks have done, because within think tanks, different organisations do things differently, and it's useful maybe to just give a flavour of what our actual product is. We're starting here with two reports. Reports are a very common product of a think tank, so a lot of what we do is write research and publish it. And quite often we do that in a very traditional format with a PDF on our website. And here are two great reports. The first one is from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and here they've taken some UK bank account data, so an interesting new set of data to try and understand what happens to people's spending patterns when they become unemployed, and how much the benefit system helps them through that shock of becoming unemployed. So taking new data, producing new insights that will help inform public policy on a really important issue of becoming unemployed. So great example from the IFS. And then on the right hand side, we've got one from the Learning and Work Institute. It's called No Train, No Gain. It says, can the UK boost job mobility and pay growth over the next decade? So again, you can see a really big, important question that they're looking into. And they, in this report, they dig into what happens when people receive training, and this dilemma that actually they find that training can be more important for people in lower pay and more beneficial, but that people with higher pay tend to get more training. So they're exposing a kind of contradiction in public policy where maybe we could do better, but on quite a big question, and then a really nice crunchy specific issue of how we provide training and to who. And then some other ways that think tanks might do work and have influence that are slightly different from a report. So the picture you can see of the man standing at a lectern, like me, is Darren Jones, a government minister, and he's here delivering a speech at a really excellent Institute for Government event. So the Institute for Government look at how the civil service works, how it delivers the policies that the government wants, and how that could be better. They publish an annual review of how that's going, and they had an event in January where Darren Jones spoke about what he thinks needs to change in the civil service. So you can see there they've got a government minister at their event, hearing their research and giving his views, so really direct example of how they can have impact. But they'll also have an audience there of interested people. I have been to a few IFG events, and the other way is we talked about bringing people together. So you're also kind of getting a set of people interested in the same issues in a room and having a good discussion. And then I've been modest and only included one from the Resolution Foundation, but to give you an example, here we've got a Substack post, and if you'd like to subscribe to our Substack, please do. We've just launched it. So this is a post about UK productivity and what's going on with UK productivity. There's a lot of confusion about labour market data in the UK, and depending how you look at that can lead to different answers on productivity. So Gregory Thwaites, who work here, dug into this in this Substack to try and explain what's going on in the data, and that's another way that we try and have influence by talking about the economy in a way that resonates hopefully with journalists and others, so that the kind of decision makers understand this really important issue of the uncertainty about what's going on. And then finally, a project from the Institute for Employment Studies. And I thought this was a really nice example because this is where they do an independent evaluation of a really particular policy programme. So in this case, supporting economically inactive individuals to return to work in Yorkshire. So there's been a very specific policy that's been done in Yorkshire, and what they're doing in this project is evaluating it and saying what worked, what didn't work, so that independent evaluation of policy can really help make it better next time, and is maybe more hands-on than some of the other examples. So I hope it gives you a flavour of the real range of work that happens in think tanks. So that is all I wanted to say today. I hope that that's given you a taster about what a think tank and working in a think tank can be like, but I am sure that you will get a lot more from all of the panel discussions. As I said before, I think if you're interested in public policy, if you're interested in changing the world, then you might have thought about working for the civil service, and you should. You might have thought about becoming an academic, and you should. And you might have thought about becoming a journalist, and those are all great careers. But perhaps joining a think tank is a less obvious course, but it's a really fascinating one that, as I say, really allows you the freedom of a journalist to say what you want, but bringing the kind of rigour of an academic to build your evidence base for what you think, but also to have impact in the way that a civil servant does. So I'm going to say that you can have everything and join a think tank. So in terms of what's going to happen now, the next panel is from our HR teams, who'll help you understand a bit more about the practicalities of an application process and other questions that you have. If you do want to ask questions in any of the panel sessions, then you can do that by going on to Slido, and you just need to enter the hashtag thinktanks. You can see it there with 2 capital T's. So please do, and think they're keen to have your questions. And it would be really great if you could also complete the equal ops form so that we can monitor our reach. Part of the reason we're running this event is to improve the outreach and diversity that we achieve, and that's really important to lots of us, and that's why we have this event. So if you can fill in that form, we would really, really appreciate it. To do that, there should be a link available in the YouTube description, so hopefully if you're watching this, that's not too hard to do. We will take 5 minutes or so just to reorganise ourselves and get the next panel ready. So make a cup of tea, fill in the equal ops form, get your Slido ready, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the event.
question 2 on applying for the jobs in the think tank sector. My name's Shrina. I'm People and Operations Manager at New Philanthropy Capital.
And I'm Karen Vella, the HR Manager at the Untitled Trust. We're a think tank focused on improving health and social care in the UK. So we're going to be looking at some of the common questions that come up around working in a think tank. I'm picking up the first few questions, so looking at what qualifications and experience are needed. So it's very much dependent on the think tank you're applying to and on the specific role. There will be requirements that are specified, so look at advertisements that are out there. They will usually have a job pack associated with them. Go and look at the person specification. That will be very clearly laid out exactly what skills and experience we are looking for that role. So make sure you're checking that information carefully. You might not need a particular degree. Some think tanks, some roles will require a specific degree. So if you're looking at an economics think tank, for example, chances are you'll need a degree in economics, but many will just require general experience of things like research methodology. So go and check those person specifications. Another question we get a lot is what flexible working do think tanks support? First thing to be aware of is every employee has the legal right to request flexible working. It doesn't mean the employer is going to agree to everything. It has to work for both the business and for you. But a lot of think tanks do support hybrid working. One of the things to think about is what are the benefits of both in-person working and working at home. So at home, obviously, you're saving time in terms of the commute, you're saving money as well, work-life balance, all those sorts of things. But there are huge benefits to being in an office environment as well. So you can really get the best of both worlds. So thinking about the access you have to people who are hugely experienced in working in the think tank. So it's a real learning opportunity, a lot of collaborative working, team working. So it's important, being available to be in the office as well. And then one of the key questions that comes up is, do think tanks sponsor international students? So the key thing here is that we all have to comply with the Home Office regulations around sponsorship. So if a think tank is to sponsor you, they need to have a license, and it's a very time-consuming process. It's quite costly. So not all think tanks will have a license. And then you have to have a role that meets the requirements of the Home Office in terms of the salary. And they have recently increased the salary threshold to 41,700. So that's quite challenging at entry level. As an example, a research assistant role at the Nuffield Trust is around 33,000 at the moment, the entry level. And that's common to probably all the health think tanks. We're a similar sort of level. After 2 years with progression, you'd be on around 38,000. So you can see there's a bit of a disparity there. So make sure you're checking what the salary on offer is as part of researching whether that role is right for you. Now, Shrina's going to pick up the next questions.
Yeah, so where do you think tanks advertise? Where can you find out who's got a role going and how to apply? So most importantly, if there's a cause area you're interested in or a think tank that's caught your eye, sign up to their newsletter, sign up to their social media channels. If they'll advertise anywhere, it will be on those places and on their own website. Besides that, there are a number of job sites that are commonly used among the third sector. Charity job is a big one, so that's kind of any not-for-profit kind of organisation is likely to advertise there. Guardian jobs, out of the big kind of names, is quite popular for public and third sector listings. If you're particularly interested in the kind of the elements that are closest to Parliament and MPs and things like that, there's a website called W4 and then MP, so pretty much work for MP, that advertises roles that are, some are think tanks, some are not, but if Parliament is your thing, that's a good place to look. And specifically for research roles in think tank, Smart Thinking is a really good place to look. So that's specifically for kind of more entry level roles and internships and things like that. Think tanks tend to recruit according to need, so there's no kind of seasonal fixed recruitment cycle for most of us. Roles could pop up anytime throughout the year, so yeah, do make sure you're checking those websites regularly or follow them, you know, sign up to newsletters and things to find out as soon as things go live.
Okay, and then we thought it would be quite useful just to highlight other platforms out there that are available to provide general support across various experiences. So the first one we've highlighted is Access to Work. So that's a government service. They provide a sort of additional support and costs. They can cover costs for employers on making reasonable adjustments in the workplace for anyone with a disability. I do need to highlight they are struggling, and it's currently around a 30-week wait to get support from them. So think about other sources of support. If you've got an underlying health condition or a disability and you need some support in getting into work, adjustments that you need to help you work effectively, then many charities for specific conditions will have support pages specifically, guides for employees, guides for employers, support forums, and they will provide you with documents that you can actually take to the employer to help identify what sort of support you might need in the workplace. Then I've just picked a few here just to give you an idea of the sorts of things you can find. Just do a Google search and you'll find all sorts of things online. But Bridge Group, they support students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, helping to get people into work. This particular outreach scheme called Uptree has online courses, free resources to help you with CVs, applications, interviews, all those sorts of things. Carers Trust, again, the Young Carers Futures program helps getting young adult carers into employment. And then there are lots of sort of specific initiatives aimed at improving diversity of experience. So I've just highlighted a couple here, the Black Economists Network, connecting and supporting and inspiring Black economists. The next one is one that the Nuffield Trust is involved in. It's HDI UK Black Internship Programme. And that's specifically for those who are interested in health data science. And that's an 8-week paid internship over the summer. We've actually just recruited to that over the last couple of days, and we've appointed two interns to that program. So that's the sort of thing you can find online and get support for increasing your experience and gaining experience in the think tank sector. And finally, a general support area, Charity Works graduate program. So it's a 12-month internship that can give you experience and help develop your skills as a future leader in the non-profit sector. And Shrina.
Great. So you've checked the websites. You found a role that really interests you. How would you apply? So the most important thing, if you do nothing else, is go back and look at the organisation's website. Do they have any kind of employment FAQs, recruitment FAQs, anything that might explain how they handle reasonable adjustments throughout the recruitment process? Most importantly of all, make sure you've read and understood the job ad and any attached documents. Everything essential will be in there. They're not going to be trying to catch you out with things you should have guessed for sure. Make sure you've read the instructions in that job ad. What documents do you need to provide? Do they need to be a certain length? All of that kind of stuff. Make sure you present your application clearly. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the most, elaborate prose. If your way of doing it is bullet points, if your way of doing it is doing a table with your criteria, how I meet it, your criteria, how I meet it, that's perfectly acceptable to a lot of employers, so long as they understand that you've met the criteria in your application. That's the essential thing. So do highlight how you're meeting those essential requirements and bullet points in the job ad. Provide concrete evidence to back up those experiences and how you meet those requirements. It is a research role after all. And make sure you tailor each application to that specific role. And kind of a few other hygiene factors, like, make sure you proofread it, perhaps ask someone to take a look for you. And with regards to AI, hopefully the organisation's website will have some information and guidance of their approach to AI. But if you do use AI in your application or the subsequent recruitment process, do be prepared to explain how understand what you are putting forwards, even if you did use AI. Great. So I understand we've had a lot of questions through, so we're going to work our way through those. Let's go with this one first. I was wondering if a master's degree is necessary for entry-level positions within the think tank sector. For us, it's not. Really, it's all about those bullet points in the job ad. So if one of those bullet points isn't must have a master's degree, it's not a prerequisite, I would say.
Yeah, I think the organisation would need to justify why they needed a master's level degree. It's really important that the requirements for the role match what is actually needed to be able to do the job. And we find that an undergraduate degree in pretty much any subject, but particularly for our research jobs, if there's some element of understanding research methodology, that's the key area, definitely not a master's degree.
An interesting question here. Many entry-level jobs require years of experience. How should new graduates with limited experience go about making competitive applications for these kind of roles? Do you want to take that one first?
I think one of the important things, which may not help if you're graduating this summer, but always think about possible summer work you can do, part-time work that you can do, because it's for our organisation, we completely accept that entry-level jobs you're not going to have those years of experience. So thinking about what you've done at university and using the project work that you've done at university as examples of how you meet the requirements on the job role. But if you have specific job experience, I like to see that in an application. I also like to see things like, as you say, around volunteering. but also your experiences of getting involved in things like sport. So there's all sorts of positive things that you can bring from your experience of being involved in a team, being, you know, part of that teamwork, that motivation, that dedication to achieving a goal. That kind of thing, I think, is also important. So if you've got those sorts of things, you can bring those in as examples as well. Sharina?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Do draw on all of your life experiences and you know, those transferable skills that you might have. We kind of, for all levels of roles, a good example is, you know, if someone's been a carer for a while, now there's a lot of skills that you develop as a carer that are definitely useful in the workplace. So yeah, you might not have a job-based example of how you meet a criteria, but if it, you know, if you have it from somewhere, it counts. One that gets asked quite a lot: what types of degrees are best suited for someone to work in a think tank? Again, it's all about what's on the job ad. If they specify a particular degree, then that's probably what you need. If you want to go into a specialist area, we've talked about kind of, you know, if you want to be an economist or something, then they're likely to want a specific kind of skill set. So NPC, where I work, we're a consultancy as well as a think tank. So we don't ask for a specific subject for a degree, but we do ask for certain competencies like data analysis or, you know, ability to work with others. And as we just talked about, you know, you can pick that up from all sorts of places.
We're probably similar, no specific type of degree, but it will depend on the role. So we might be looking for a role that's specifically quantitative focused, so a kind of a statistics or that type of health economics, or it could be more qualitative, or it could be mixed methods. So it's very dependent on the role.
Another question here: I'm disabled and a mature student, and moving to London wouldn't be possible. Is there scope to work remotely and part-time? I would say across the sector, there are definitely opportunities that fit that description. If you look at the websites that we talked about before, you know, you can filter on remote, you can filter on part-time. There's quite a lot out there. I definitely recommend taking a look at what sorts of things are advertised, what sorts of places are fully remote, and, you know, there's stuff outside of London too. So yeah, you have options for sure.
And I know since the pandemic, some of the think tanks have moved to almost exclusively remote working. So that certainly is an option.
And also at some workplaces, even if their standard is office time, face-to-face time, you could request a reasonable adjustment to work fully remotely. That's on a case-by-case basis. One about networking here. So I've been told that networking is required in order to get a graduate job. How should graduates go about networking meaningfully? Well, I know that our organisation attends a lot of events, a lot of networking events. Quite a lot of those are free to attend. So at the same time as looking at our website for job ads, we have an events page. So it might be worth taking a look at that. Some of those events are online, some are in person. But yeah, that's definitely an opportunity to meet new people, learn a bit more about the sector before you dive in. Some do have criteria for attending, but you'll also find that those tend to be the ones that are paid. So yeah, there are kind of sector-specific networking events that are quite open, I would say.
I think the opportunity to get a job through networking, I'd be a little bit careful of focusing too heavily on that. I think jobs should be offered to the candidates that are the best match for the job role, for the person's specification, and any suggestion that a role might go to someone who's met more people isn't necessarily an approach that I would support. It's very much around the skills and experience the individual brings to the role.
Yeah, so while networking might help you get more information and widen your horizons,
Yep.
I would expect every recruiter to actually recruit on a very equitable basis. So, for example, we anonymise our CVs before they're screened. So, you could have met all the most senior people at MPC, but they'll have no idea who you are when you actually apply for the role.
Yeah. So it's more gathering information, I think, is the value of networking.
What does salary progression look like in a think tank for various roles?
Our organisation has put quite a lot of effort into developing a scheme specifically for our organisation. So we benchmarked against other think tanks, against, I guess, public information about jobs, adverts, all those sorts of things. And we have a scale that each job is mapped against, and that's available to view for all of our employees, so they know exactly where they sit. And our progression will be aligned to that particular role, and you would expect to go up a progression point each year, assuming that you're doing, a good job, you're meeting your objectives, and you would go to the next band in the event that there is another role available at that level. That's how it works in our organisation. I think other organisations possibly have similar. I don't know how it works.
Yeah, it's very similar. So yeah, we benchmark. We also, with regards to progression, once you're with us, so we have pay bands that we stick to. We've got them built across the organisation. So an entry-level person in operations will have the same pay be on the same level of the pay scale as an entry-level person in research. And our research and consultancy team have a competency framework, so it's very clear across all of our skills that we expect in that department, kind of what you're looking for, what you have to prove in your annual review to get that pay rise, get that promotion. We try and make it as empirical as possible. I guess we kind of take the thinking that, we advise other organisations on being data-driven and evidence-based, so we better do that ourselves. Great. So as an international relations graduate interested in public affairs and lacking direct experience with MPs, policymakers and government officials, how can I make my CV and cover letter stand out, and what would make HR consider such a person? I've got to say, even with mid-level roles, there's no expectation that you've, met or had meetings or worked with MPs and policymakers at the point that you join. Certainly for an entry-level role, it's not about that. You'll be supporting existing initiatives to start with, and then as you progress, you'll be exposed to those sorts of environments.
We'd offer some kind of training, so our comms team provide a lot of training and guidance around sort of interacting with MPs, attending events at Westminster, that kind of thing. and it would be very much a gradual introduction to that type of work. I would also say that HR doesn't consider those sorts of things. It's very much the people that you'll be working with making the decisions on who is the best match for the role. Because I know a lot of HR stuff, but not so much on research and policy. So
I'm just going to scroll down to the people at the bottom of the list to give you guys a chance as well. So how do think tanks achieve profitability and fund salaries? Are there concerns regarding think tanks representing specific parties rather than common good, potentially lobbying for policies that benefit them rather than society as a whole? I think with regards to this, maybe we work for different kinds of think tanks, but ultimately with a similar approach. So MPC, we get grants to do work. That's kind of more work on our own ideas. So we have a program called Everyone's Environment that's about tackling climate change intersectional. And we've got another one on youth mental health. So people will donate money for us to work on those initiatives. We are also a consultancy, so we help charities with their strategies, evaluating their impact. We help philanthropists work out, let's say they're interested in mental health, where do I best distribute my funds and that kind of thing. So that's where we get our money from. And we are political party agnostic as a policy, and the people that we advocate for in a think tank context are the not-for-profit charity sector. Hopefully, inherently, that means where our interests are for benefiting society as a whole.
And some of us will have, the Nuffield Trust, for example, was given an endowment, which is why we're called Nuffield, is Lord Nuffield left money to the charity, which sits in investments, and we operate the charity primarily from the interest that we earn on that endowment, as well as applying for research grants, like Sharina has said. I would recommend going and looking at the website of the think tank you're interested in and looking at their accounts. Think tanks that are neutral will be very open and clear on where their sources of funding is coming from. There are think tanks out there that are less less visible on things like that, and that's, I think, where you need to be a little bit sceptical about where their funding is coming from, because we are perfectly aware that those think tanks do exist.
We've got time for more? Yeah. Question here, can you be a member of a political party and also work at a think tank at the same time? So I think every think tank might have slightly different rules around this, but for us, yes, insofar as, you can be a member of, a normal person that has a membership to a party, that's fine. It's at the point where you decide to stand to be a councillor or actually have a role in that party that you'd need to declare it and have a conversation. But otherwise, as with any personal affiliation, you've got to be impartial in your work. So as long as you draw that line, it's totally fine.
Yeah, we've got a declaration of interest form. So you would just notify on that, and then we'd, as Sharina said, we'd have a conversation about that. So we're getting the nod that we have reached the end of our session. So thank you all for listening. Please do remember to fill in the Equal Opportunities Monitoring form. We'd be really grateful if you could do that. It's available. There's a link in the YouTube description, and it just helps us monitor, make sure that we're reaching the right audience. So thank you very much.
everyone. Thanks for joining us again. I hope you've enjoyed the first two sessions. So I understand you've heard from my boss, Ruth, who gave you an introduction to think tanks overall. Hope that was good. And then you've just heard from people in HR who hopefully helped you know how do you actually get one of these jobs that we're all here to talk to you about. So I hope that was useful. This session is all about impact. It's a shorter session. It's going to be impactful, and you're here to hear from three very impactful people, and I definitely include myself in that group. So my name is Nye Comenetti. I'm a principal economist at Resolution Foundation, which is where we're sat today, and I'm joined by Darcy Snape from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and she is a research economist. And I'm also joined by Theodore Grana, who is a Learning and Development Officer from the Institute for Government. So we're really excited to speak to you today. The plan is we're each going to say a bit about some impact that we have had to hopefully give you some ideas about why working in a think tank can be impactful. And then we will look forward to answering some of your questions. So this is only a 30-minute session, so we'll each talk for a few minutes. And then we'll hopefully have 10 or 15 minutes for questions after that. The hashtag remains the same on Slido, so you can put all your questions in there. I will start seeing them coming up on the iPad soon, so we'll get to those. So please do start thinking. So first of all, I just wanted to say I think this event is really great for two reasons. One, the think tank world is kind of murky and mysterious, and no one knows quite what it is until you've joined it. And that was definitely my experience. I left university with an economics degree, but not a great deal of sort of thought about what I was going to do with it. And I'm not even sure I'd really heard of think tanks. You've seen the kind of phrase in the press a little bit, but I definitely didn't know there was such a thing as a research organization like the Resolution Foundation where you could come and do good work and try to influence public policy. So I definitely think there's a big kind of information gap, and I'm glad that this event, so ably organised by Jane and Yulia and others, is helping people to bridge that gap. Secondly, I think this event is good because think tanks are really great places to work, and I genuinely do believe that. I have been working at one for 8 years. That's how long I've been here, so I'm kind of at this point an older hand, which is a funny thing to say. But I even worked in other think tanks earlier in my career as well. So more than a decade now of my life has been spent working in think tanks, and I heartily recommend them as places to work. So for those two reasons, I'm glad you're all here, and I hope you're getting something from the event. So impact. So I'll talk for a couple of minutes. So first of all, impact is obviously really important. So the reason we are not academics is that we want to have an impact on the world, right? So academics are really clever people and they do really fantastic research, but they don't always have that big of an impact on the world, certainly not in the short term. If you're one of those sort of academics who does, path-breaking work, then yes, your ideas will filter through. But if you want to have an impact in the short term, I think being in a think tank is a better place to be, and it's certainly an important part of why I'm here. So one example of impact. So I work on issues to do with the labour market, by which we mean people's jobs, how much they're paid, whether they're working or not, whether their jobs are good jobs. And at the moment, the kind of biggest deal in that world is the government has some employment reforms. They passed an Employment Reform Act towards the end of last year. And this is, in my world, really quite a big deal. In labour market policy, there kind of wasn't a huge amount happening for quite a while. We had the minimum wage, but not a lot else. And then the Labour government came in with these big ideas, and it wanted to pass this act to put into place higher standards for workers. But it ran into trouble because the House of Lords didn't like one of its reforms. They didn't like specifically a reform relating to unfair dismissal, which is whether as a worker you have the right to go to an employment tribunal and say, I've lost my job and this was unfair, I should have my job back, or I should have some kind of compensation. Now the current situation in the UK is that as a worker, you only get this right after 2 years in your job. So we think that's unfair and it should kick in earlier. The government's suggestion, though, was that you should have this right on your first day in the job. Okay, so we were kind of going from one extreme to, I would argue at least, you can form your own views, to the other. And the Lords were saying, we don't like the look of this. So the legislation was kind of bouncing between the House of Commons and the Lords, and it was all becoming a bit fraught. we did have a view, and we had put out a paper earlier in the year kind of going into all the ins and outs of it. But what we decided to do was, on this specific issue of unfair dismissal, was to write a paper mainly just putting the UK into an international context. So just showing people that the current starting point of a 2-year waiting period was very extreme, and that the government's proposal of this kicking on a day one was also somewhat unusual by the standards of other countries. Basically, all other rich countries give workers this right after 3 months or 6 months. So our argument was this would be a reasonable way to proceed. It would balance more security for workers on the one hand, but also not hopefully do damage to employers' willingness to hire people and take a risk on new workers. So we put our suggestion out there, and somewhat strangely for me, our paper, because it arrived at the right moment, was being read out in the House of Lords when they were having these arguments. So you can find my name, I think, in Hansard, which is where they write down everything that gets said in comments. So this is very exciting. And in the end, the legislation did pass on that basis. So, you know, we weren't the only people that the government were listening to. Obviously, they were listening to unions and business groups and other economists as well. But that felt like an example of impact. So we were happy about that. Just one further comment. So how did we have impact? Mainly it was just drawing on evidence, right? So I think that will probably be a theme of your session today, because you're going to listen to 3 of us, all of whom deal, you know, heavily with evidence, perhaps of an economic nature, perhaps you know, looking at, you know, evidence from other bits of the social sciences. But really that was the thrust of it. You know, our voice wasn't heard in Parliament just because we put our hand up and said this is what we think. It was based on the evidence, right? So that's how we really try and have impact, certainly at Resolution Foundation. All right, that's enough from me. I can't remember if we agreed a running order. Hopefully you're okay to just go Darcy and then Theodore. So Darcy, could you tell us a little bit about your work and how you've had impact?
Thank you very much. So yeah, I work at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. So we're a team of economists, and we do research kind of through an economics lens. I would think one of the things that we do as a group that's maybe slightly different to a lot of think tanks and has a lot of bearing on the kind of policy impact that we're trying to do is that a lot of our time is spent doing, you know, very academic research. We do a lot of work with academics at universities and also just within IFS. And as kind of Nye mentioned, often that can feel very remote from the policy influencing process, because there is kind of a very big gulf between academia and policymakers. And I think we see one of our roles as being able to bridge that divide somewhat. I think we try and do that in a couple ways. First, you know, we choose what we research very carefully. We try and do research on things that we think are going to be of very specific interest to policymakers, and that will have a very kind of have a bearing on what they're actually thinking about and what policies they're thinking about to implement in the real world. I think the other way that we try and do that, and that's quite distinct from how academics do research, is that we're very careful about how we try and communicate our research. So when we do an academic project, not only will we kind of produce a paper that hopefully ends up in some sort of academic journal, but we'll almost always put out some sort of short summary of what our research findings are, and sometimes kind of a longer report that details what we found, but in much less technical language, especially so that non-economists can kind of understand what we're doing and what we've actually found. And I think that can, you know, even though academia can be very remote from this policy process, by trying to bridge that divide, it can actually be some of the most impactful work that we do, because the point of academic research, especially in economics, is trying to establish causality. You know, what impact did this policy have on these set of outcomes, which is ultimately the question that policymakers are interested in answering. So by being able to do that research and then try and communicate that to policymakers, that can, you know, end up forming a large part of the evidence base that policymakers end up using to justify policies. So to give a concrete example, some of the researchers in my team, in collaboration with other academics, did a program of work trying to evaluate what was the impact of Sure Start centres, which were hubs set up in the early 2000s to provide resources for parents of young kids. What was the impact of these centres on the outcomes of the kids that had access to them? And we kind of did a very long and detailed program of work showing that actually this had really beneficial outcomes for the kids that had access to them in terms of things like academic attainment and health and justice. And that meant that when the new Labour government kind of came into power and was thinking about what sort of program of works do we want to do now that we have power, one of their objectives is to kind of promote the sort of outcomes that we found Sure Start centres had a really positive impact on. And so our evidence formed a kind of crucial part of their decision to plan to expand their Best Start programme, which essentially tried to replicate a lot of what these Sure Start centres did. So I think being able to bridge that kind of divide and put really robust causal evidence in front of policymakers for things that are really, really relevant to them, for us is a really important way of trying to influence the policy process, because often that can be, the things that are of most value to policymakers.
Thanks very much, and that's definitely a really good example. And just to say, you can go and read that paper yourself, right? If you're not,
please do.
Yeah, please do. So if you're not convinced about how strong the evidence and the arguments are, definitely go and read it. I read it myself, and it really was a really good paper. You can read mine as well. My one was called Day One Frights. Doesn't have too many charts in it, and it's a great read. Thank you very much, Darcy. Theodore, over to you. Could you tell us a bit about your work, please?
Thanks for that. And I just want to start by saying I'm really glad to be here. And actually, a couple of years ago, whilst I was still in university, and before I'd even joined the think tank sector, I also watched this exact event, and I found it extremely useful to just sort of open up this black box of what it is that think tanks actually do and what their work actually consists of. So I'm really glad to be here. I work at the Institute for Government, which is a charity that focuses on government effectiveness, so making government more effective, meaning that we are not as interested in the what of policy, but we're interested in the how of policy. We're non-partisan, so we try to basically take the government at its word in terms of what it says it wants to do, and then we try to ask ourselves what is the most effective way to get to those kinds of outcomes that the government is trying to do, and we try to help government think through how to go about sort of using the machinery of government and of the civil service to that end. And obviously, as has been sort of already outlined, there are many different routes, many different ways of doing that kind of thing, and many routes to achieving impact. Some of our work sort of takes a similar shape to the work of IFS and Resolution Foundation, in the sense that we sort of carry out research and then we sort of make an argument about how we think things should change in terms of policymaking, and in particularly in terms of governance arrangements, how institutions are set up, how decision-making processes are set up in government. And then we try to make that argument publicly through reports, through various kinds of commentary, and we also try to engage with the people who are doing the policymaking. So that's civil servants, government officials who are sort of working on this day in, day out, but also political teams. So one example of this is one of our work streams is on devolution, and we've done quite a bit of work on thinking about how the government might go about sort of completing the map of English devolution. How do you sort of expand the model of combined authorities, what are now called mayoral strategic authorities, like to other places in England? And we've done quite a lot of research on that, and we've done quite a lot of engagement with officials in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, as well as the political teams in that government department, as this has sort of been a big sort of cross-partisan priority of trying to devolve more power away from the centre and to bring it closer to communities. And what that impact might look like is some of the things that we've been arguing for and that we've been making the case for publicly, things sort of ranging from the kinds of governance arrangements that you set up in mayoral strategic authorities, including sort of using simple majority voting rules rather than consensus voting or two-thirds based voting, or the kinds of powers that mayors have in a lot of these places, including over skills or transportation, sort of seeing a lot of those reflected in the English devolution white paper when it came out was sort of one example that we tried to see that impact being achieved. Another way that we try to do impact, and one thing that we've done since sort of being set up as a think tank, is we've done a lot of learning and development work. Some of that work is done with people in government, and what we try to do is we try to help them think through how to achieve their priorities. We don't tell them what their priorities should be, but we tell them, given that these are your priorities, here is how you sort of use the machinery of government to achieve them. We have a program called Prep for Government, meaning that we, with opposition parties in Westminster and increasingly in the devolved nations, we just have sessions where we help them think through how to do that kind of work and what levers there are or what sorts of mechanisms there are for them getting their objectives achieved, might be once they're in government. But we also do quite a lot of learning and development work with people outside of government, external experts, because we really think that's an important thing for government to do, to listen to external voices that have expertise in particular areas. That includes a lot of work that we do with academics, with a lot of research councils, from ESRC to AHIC, the British Academy, where we just talk to academics and we talk to them about how government works and what kind of routes there are for them to engage with government and really make their voices heard and really be able to have meaningful input into decision making. So that's, I think, there are many different routes to sort of achieving that kind of impact. And there's some of the public, you put out a report and you hope that there's sort of enough buzz around it, but there's a lot of sort of engagement that happens with the people who are doing the policy making day to day. And that's a really, really sort of exciting place, I think, to be in, working in a think tank.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think basically a good marker of when you've done a good report is you should start getting emails basically from the civil servants, or maybe even sometimes the politicians and their teams saying, this looks like a good report. I need to understand what you said. Come in and talk to me. So sometimes you write a report and it gets massively splashed across the news, and obviously that feels like impact, but ultimately what you want to do is change decision making. So I think that's usually the best measure. Do the people that are working on the area that you're working on want to hear from you? And if you've done really good work, have presented your argument well, can help them understand something, and or have come up with a helpful proposal, usually you will see their emails landing in your inbox, and that is always very great, very gratifying. Okay, well, thank you very much, both of you. Two very impactful people here, as I'm sure you will agree. So let's have a look at some of your questions. I'm not yet seeing too many questions about impact, everybody. We can see lots of questions here that we're happily to just engage with. Absolutely, you can continue asking whatever you feel like. But if you have anything specifically about impact, that would be fantastic. But while we wait for questions that have the word impact in them, and I will see them here, so please start dropping them in. Maybe we could just sort of take some of the sort of various questions that are dropping in. Question 1, how did you get into think tank research, guys? Did you have any former experience, and if so, what? And relatedly, there's a couple of other things saying, what degrees do you have? How much does that matter? And then another one was asking about, do I need to know loads of maths and statistics to work in a think tank? So Darcy, maybe you could start. So the IFS is obviously very, quant-based, and all of you are obviously super good at maths. But does that mean I need to be really good at maths to work in a think tank?
I think, as you say, IFS can sometimes be a bit of a special case, because essentially when it comes to researchers, we hire economists. So if the question is what degree do I need to do, you need to do an economics degree. But obviously, beyond the kind of basic requirement of being an economist, we look for a range of things when we're kind of choosing who to recruit each year. Obviously, kind of statistical analysis and being up to date with economic research methods is super important, given that that's 90% of the day job. But we also really care about how do you communicate? Can you explain economic ideas simply to a general non-economist audience? Because that's a huge part of our work, and coming back to impact, I think that is one of the skills that is most important for making sure that your work actually ends up being read and crucially understood by the people that you want it to be. So I think, we look for a mix of skills, and not everyone will be, amazing at everything, but being a really fantastic economist, as well as having these other skills of being a good communicator and being able to work well in a team and do research in a team is what we really care about.
Taylor, what about you? The IFG, I would say, has got probably more of a mix of people of different disciplines and backgrounds. Is that right? Yeah,
I would say so. And I think, so I think in terms of actual requirements, so for the research internship at the IFG, which is the way that I sort of got into got to working in a think tank, there's no requirement of like any particular degree. The requirement is just an undergraduate degree in anything. So people on the research internship have done classics, they've done politics, they've done IR, they've done history, so a bunch of different kind of subjects. And I think the most important thing that I would say we try to test for in recruitment is, do you understand what the organization that you're applying for is about? Like, do you understand what it is trying to do, what the mission is? And in our case, obviously, is the way that you think about some of these policy issues, are you able to think about them in this very sort of process way, in thinking about how to make things more effective? Are you interested in that? Is that something that it seems like you're passionate about? And is it something that you are able to think about in a very sort of clear, analytical kind of way? And I think that is the main thing that is actually tested through the recruitment process in the case of the IFG.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, Resolution Foundation, we have a lot of people that have economics degrees, but certainly not everyone does. Not all of the research we do is statistics or quantitative based. We do qualitative research as well. We speak to people, we conduct focus groups, we do deliberative work. So I think I would agree with Theodore. The most important things for us are, motivation. Are you really, excited to work here? Do you agree with the mission? And then, really important is just, can you, think effectively about the questions we're trying to answer? And numerical analysis is not the only way to add value into a question. So please don't be put off working in think tanks if you haven't done statistics. And also, at Resolution Foundation, we can teach you how to code. We can teach you some of the more commonly used statistical techniques. So if you're really strong on your knowledge of what's going on in the world or in society, and you're really strong on what's going on in politics and policy, but you're not so good on the number side of things, please do try and explore what options are out there, because there will be something for you, I'm sure. Okay, here's a good one on impact. What happens if you write a low impact report, or if you write a report which underperforms in some sense? What do you do? It's moved slightly. But how do you respond to that? My answer would be, you should not be in the business of saying, well, the report didn't go well, therefore everyone else in the world is wrong, and why didn't they listen to my fantastic report? If people haven't listened to you at all, that's a pretty good clue. That's quite useful information. So I think first of all, it's incumbent on you as a researcher or an author to think, why didn't that report land? Was my argument not strong enough? Was I asking a question that just wasn't important or interesting enough? So definitely a bit of self-reflection, I think, is important. But that said, it is true that sometimes you can get unlucky. Sometimes you publish a report and Donald Trump has just said something ridiculous on Twitter. The number of times I've been invited onto a radio program and then you get cancelled because something more short-term and newsy has happened. So that can happen. But I still think if you've written something good enough, the right people will notice. So if you've written a report and it didn't get any media and no one wanted to talk to you about it, then probably start trying to write some better reports, is what I would say. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I think the point about there being lots of different paths to impact is really important, because obviously not everything you write is going to end up in the media, because the media is not interested in everything you write. But if it is read by someone in government, and sometimes you won't always know about that, but even months and months after I've written a piece, someone will sometimes email, can we talk about the analysis in this? And I think, beyond just each individual item of work having impact, I think often when we're doing work, it'll be part of a broader kind of program of work. So I've put out a lot of things on my area of research on special educational needs. Not every single one will be read, but we can build on the analysis that we do for everything, and putting together that kind of broad program of analysis on a given area can actually, even if not every single thing has been picked up by the media, together that can be quite an impactful package of work, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I would just say, I think the big question is what is it that you're trying to do with a particular piece of work? And sometimes it might be that you're not trying to get change happening right now. It might be that you just want to shift the terms of the debate in a particular field. And it might be the case that right now it's the terrain is not particularly ripe for a big policy change, but later down the line, when something happens, there's some kind of window of opportunity, you already have done the analysis, you've already done the legwork, and you can just say, hey, there's this idea that we've had for quite a while, maybe it's time for us to take it seriously now.
I think, yeah, that's definitely a good point. I was being, slightly trite earlier by saying, if the emails don't follow, you've done something wrong. I mean, there's a kind of an oft-repeated idea that, when a new government takes power, the thing that matters most is kind of what ideas are there already in the ether waiting to be used. So, yes, you can definitely have moments where, you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall in terms of the specific policy you're advocating for. But if you're producing really good analysis and good argument, then when the political winds change, you might find that impact can follow. Darcy, your name is mentioned first word in this question, so I can't help but read it out. I haven't got to the end of it though, so I hope it's a good question. Darcy, I read your report on Sure Start, which was brilliant. That's nice. Could you share how you selected that topic and what the practical impact of the work has been so far, and are you going to be doing more work in the area?
Well, I should say that despite being named, I was not an author on this report. This is work of my team more broadly. I think, how was that topic selected? I think it was selected by researchers for a few reasons. Firstly, this was something that I think we knew that the Labour Party, I think then in opposition, were thinking about as kind of a policy that might be brought back if they came into government, and so that was kind of an obvious candidate for something to do work on. I think it's also just intrinsically interesting in itself. My team work on education and skills, and this was a big investment into kind of early years resources for parents of young children. And so I think it's just, our team having that interest in, well, this was a massive program. What outcomes did it have? Can we say something useful about them? That's kind of what sparked the interest. The work on it is still ongoing. I think it will sort of be eternally ongoing as we can track the outcomes of kids further and further. But yeah, I think it's kind of that mix of our own curiosity as well as recognizing that it's probably going to be quite policy relevant.
Thank you. Taylor, this is a really good question. So how impactful are you, or are we, relative to working, let's say, in the civil service or working in a charity where you're helping people directly? What are we really doing here? If I want to help people, sure, are we really in the right place?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those are really, really valid routes for impact, but I think they try to do very different things, right? Like, I think the freedom that you have in a think tank, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy working in a think tank, is you get to work in an organization that you pick because you're aligned with its mission, with its goals, with what it wants to do, and then you are able to influence decision making in that particular way, which is sort of some kind of leeway that you don't really have as much of in the civil service. And then I guess relative to other kinds of charities, I think it's just a different kind of work and a different kind of skill set. I don't know if my skill set would be particularly well suited to doing like the really, really valuable work that a lot of people do on the front line, but I know that the kind of skill set that I have may be more useful in this particular context. So it's just sort of a question of like, what is it that you actually want to do practically? What do you want your day-to-day job to look like? And I think you're going to hear quite a bit about this in one of the following sessions, to get a sense of like, is this for me? Is this the route that I want to achieve impact? And does it suit my particular skills?
Yeah, definitely a shout out for the next session, which Imogen will be running. I think, to me, having impact is one of the reasons why I like working in a think tank, but just the day-to-day feeling of working here, the kind of interactions you have, is really, really important. So I'd say stick around for that. Almost going to end. One more question was, how do I find or read impactful think tank research? It's a good question. I would say, not to sort of overly brag again about the quality of the organisations represented here, but I think most things published on our website, the IFG or the IFS's website, are worth reading. Genuinely, these are really high quality organisations that produce good work. So I don't think there's anything like bad on there. In terms of like the most talked about stuff, I would say just what is making people talk on Blue Sky, basically. Like in any given week, if you follow the right people, and I'll say who that is, you'll just see some reports are just doing the rounds, getting people really excited, really interested, generating a lot of chatter. Sometimes that breaks out onto the news. So how do you know what that is? I guess it's about who you follow. So you could find each of us on social media, find the people that we follow, and that will kind of give you a sense of like who the kind of big talkers are. And very quickly you'll see who are the big chatters on these social networks. And I think that will give you a pretty good kind of insight into what this kind of world looks like when people are all talking together. So that's probably how I would go about it. Right, I think that's probably it because I need to wrap up fairly promptly. Please, could you fill in the form, which is called the Equal Opportunities form, which is available to you in the description of underneath where you're watching. So please do that. That helps us a lot because we put this event on every year and we want to know that it's reaching the right people. So we'd appreciate that very much. And I would finally like to thank very much Darcy and Taylor for their time. There's not an audience here, but we'll do a micro clap because they really helped us a lot to understand how to have impact in the think tank world. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. This is the last session of the day, a day in the life of a researcher. I'm Imogen, I'm a researcher at the Resolution Foundation, and I'm joined today by Abby, who works at the Institute for Employment Studies, Aidan, who's from Demos, Sabrina, who works at New Philanthropy Capital, and Daniel, who works at the Institute for Government. So everyone's going to give a proper intro as to who they are, their background, their job. So yeah, we're going to do intro each, and then we'll be followed by a Q&A. So please submit your questions on Slido, and once we've finished our intros, we will do our best to answer them. So without further ado, I will introduce myself. So I've worked at the Resolution Foundation for a year or so now. My job title is researcher, but my background is kind of, my route into the think tank sector wasn't necessarily kind of coming straight from my undergraduate degree. I did a modern history and politics degree, and when I graduated I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, to be honest. So I worked in marketing and communications for a couple of years, and then got a job working at a cancer charity, where I started doing some research, policy work, looking at health inequalities, which was really what kind of piqued my interest into the sector. And off the back of that, it led me to go study a Master of Public Policy, which I did a 2-year degree, which involved a lot of it was quite practical, which was really good. So learnt about the policy process, public policy, but also statistics, economics, did kind of labs and learnt like how to do data analysis. So that was really helpful into kind of giving me the skills that I knew that I wanted to get into the think tank sector off the back of that. And so since after I finished that degree was when I started looking for jobs in the sector, and got this job at the Resolution Foundation. I think what I would have kind of said, what I would have wanted to know when I was starting out in my undergraduate degree would kind of echoed something that Nye said in the session before, that I don't remember even hearing about what a think tank was at the time. So I didn't even really know that this was something that I could get into to do research in this way. But at the same time, I actually think the experience that I got kind of before doing my master's degree was really valuable, and kind of that diversity of experience coming into the sector has given me extra skills. Kind of knowing communications when it comes to research is like really, really important. So I wouldn't necessarily change what I did, but it definitely would have helped to kind of have a bit more insight into the sector starting out. What kind of made me want to get into the think tank sector once I knew about it was, like love research. It was the kind of the fast pace element of the research, the kind of problem solving, kind of getting really into like both into kind of intricacies of issues, or like, but also stepping back in big picture and looking at how things relate to each other. So that's kind of what attracted me to the sector. And the Resolution Foundation, actually, when I was doing my master's degree, I kind of was doing a module on macroeconomics and came across some of the research, and it was really helped. Kind of I felt like that was such a it was well explained. Kind of as someone who was learning some of those topics for the first time, I thought that's actually so useful. I've come away from that with like a lot of understanding of that topic, so I thought that was great. And since I joined the Resolution Foundation, I've worked on a wide range of projects, from kind of research into specific issues like precarious work, quantitative research, I should say, and worked on a project like analysing kind of health and care and how that affects people's living standards, which we also did some qualitative research in that project. So we kind of ran some workshops and spoke to people about like issues that affect them. I've also been involved in the kind of weekly newsletter that we do, so that's kind of a really different pace to working on a longer research project, so kind of looking at research and what's happening in that week and trying to kind of highlight issues that are like really topical. And most recently just was kind of involved in a big project that we just finished at the Resolution Foundation, which was a kind of culmination of a year-long project, looking at the kind of living standards of people on lower incomes, which culminated in this book that lots of us worked on and we launched last week in a kind of half-day conference. So it's been really varied, really interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into it more as we get into the questions, but I will pass over to Abby to introduce herself.
Thank you, Imogen. So my name's Abby. I work for the Institute for Employment Studies. We are an independent research organisation based in Brighton, and we do lots of research sort of commissioned by other larger research organisations and in different areas of government, looking at the effectiveness of policies and programmes, kind of looking at what's working well, but also where the gaps are. So our research focus is sort of in educational settings, looking at youth unemployment, youth transitions from education into employment, and also looking at the people's sort of experiences in work and those out of work. So yes, our organisation is very multidisciplinary. We have a wide-ranging variety of staff members with different backgrounds, and the variety of projects and research work we do really does extend through a large range of different topics. So yes, as I said, I'm a degree apprentice, so I joined the sector after finishing my A-levels. I really found my passion for social sciences when I was studying, and my initial plan was to go to university. But I think the idea of apprenticeships really attracted me, sort of the opportunity to learn on the job, sort of gain a salary, and also have the opportunity to do a degree, and that combination of kind of on-the-job learning really attracted me. So when I first heard about the social research degree apprenticeship, it really took my interest. I think I didn't really know what social research was initially, but I think when looking at the different job descriptions and explanations, I think something that really stood out to me was the whole sphere around doing work to understand and improve and help society in a variety of different ways. So I applied to a variety of different organisations who were offering the same degree apprenticeship, but I think I'm really glad that IES offered me this opportunity. As I said, the variety of work really does span throughout a range of education, employment projects, taking sort of a mixed method approach. We do lots of qualitative work and also quantitative research work. And also sort of, although we are a smaller organisation, the support networks that I've been given where I work, all of the colleagues are super supportive in helping me learn different things throughout research and throughout the different projects that I do, but also kind of in helping me develop personally and on a variety of different levels. So as I said, it's sort of a degree apprenticeship. So I work 80% of the time, and I study 20% of the time. However, I would argue that I am learning all the time. It's a continual process, and quite often I'm learning things at work first. So, for example, undertaking interviews or learning how to design surveys in work first, and then I'll learn how to do it at university. And maybe sort of in more detail, or really just kind of to internalise my understandings and how the two things link together. And lots of the assignments that I do really work together to kind of use the things that I'm learning within work and how I can kind of apply my knowledge of different things and within university and work, and apply the knowledge straight away. And I think that really does help me to learn and to just fully understand the breadth of research, not just looking at okay, like this is a research method, and this is a report, and this is how we're going to like develop our findings and disseminate research, but actually looking at the whole process of kind of moving from the purpose of research to the aims, to the method, the design, and the outputs. And I think also sort of in terms of the skills that I've learned, although I've learned lots of skills within research, the soft skills that I've developed, I think, have been really valuable in terms of understanding that kind of work-life balance, the confidence that I've built in terms of communication with employees, with colleagues, and sort of learning a variety of different kind of ways to communicate and to work. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I would recommend it to anyone, graduate or undergraduate.
Thank you, Abby. So now we'll pass over on to Aidan.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Yes, my name's Aidan Garner. I'm a researcher at the cross-party think tank Demos. We're based just about 10-15 minutes walk from here on Whitehall. We're a cross-party think tank. We work across many different disciplines. We have our 4 core pillars. That's everyday democracy, which is really focused on tackling kind of root causes of distrust and miscommunication between policymaking and how policies understood and what's going on in government and how that's felt and how that's perceived by people on the ground, and trying to improve that. We have our citizen economy pillar, which is focusing on making an economy that works for everyone and that everyone has a stake in. We have our public service reform, which I'm particularly interested in, which is more self-explanatory. That covers public service reform both on the local level and practically what's happening on the ground as public services are delivered, social care, for example, education at a local government level or at a devolved level, but also on the bureaucratic side, what's happening in Whitehall and how we can reform at the centre to enable reform further downstream. And then we also have our Demos digital team who cover all things digital, AI, and the governance and safety around that, but also social media, mis and disinformation online, and safety around information. My background, so I'm from the northeast of England originally. I'm from Darlington. I then did a degree in politics, philosophy and economics, PPE, at Queen's University Belfast. Obviously a very different and interesting political environment to throw myself into. And from both the degree and the nature of the city of Belfast itself, I gained a lot of skills and knowledge of different kind of sorts of political policy-making environments, and the different structures and institutions that impact policymaking and impact politics that I still draw on every day in the work that I do now. Specifically as part of my degree, I did an internship in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, which at the time when I was in the Department for the Economy, the devolved Department for the Economy there, we actually didn't have a minister because of the devolved executive being suspended at the time. So just kind of getting into the weeds of what that's like inside the department when you don't have a minister, and comparing that to the civil service and the work that I do now in public service reform. I also did an Erasmus placement in the University of Copenhagen, where I was there for half a year in Denmark, and that exposed me to even more institutional policymaking environments in the EU, and of course in a different country in Denmark. I then went on to do a master's degree in public policy at University College London. And the purpose of doing that degree really for me was that I decided throughout my undergrad that my kind of interest in politics and kind of social policy that I'd already had since I was kind of 16 or so had really developed into a keen interest in policy and policy making. And I did that degree at UCL with an eye on then working in the think tank sector after, and that's exactly how it happened in the end, that I graduated from my master's in September and started at Demos just a few weeks later. On that course, I learned a lot more specific skills about quantitative research and data modelling and qualitative research, looking at archives, how to conduct interviews with stakeholders, and also melding those kind of mixed methods and understanding when to use methods and also when to use different methods, and also then translating insights into actual recommendations and analysis that can be turned into meaningful policy reports, meaningful blogs, articles, whatever the output may be. I think before I worked in a think tank, I think what people should know before they, if they're interested in working in think tanks, which I obviously think you should be, is that skills and kind of curiosity and having that broad, open mindset and different skills analytically is much more important, in my view, than specific knowledge itself. I don't think you have to be, if you're 18, 19, or you've just graduated, you don't have to be an expert in health policy to go and do a really good report on health policy. It's more about those skills that I mentioned in terms of quant research, quantitative research, qualitative research, and how you can work with others, speak to experts, collate data, and understanding that jump from insight to impact. When applying to a think tank, I think one thing that really might set you apart, or certainly is super important, is to understand that difference between the kind of academic side of research, which is obviously like fundamentally extraordinarily important and really focused on getting under the skin of a topic and really doing primary research and the analysis behind that, versus the political side in how you can connect that with stakeholders, how you can find white space in policy, looking at timelines, looking at what the government's doing legislatively, looking at, and this can be changed, with a breach or follow, with a scandal, things happen, but understanding how you can convert that academic deep research into practical insights and impact, which is really the name of the game. If you work in a think tank, you want to see impact. What attracted me to the think tank sector as opposed to other kind of research or politics roles that I also considered at some points was that entrepreneurial nature that I think of think tanks, which is that you really do get out what you put in a way that is not necessarily the case in other walks of life. There's a real meritocracy of ideas and of analysis. I think if I have a really good idea and I speak to some good experts and I speak to the team internally and we can get the funding behind it, and that research gets done, then people will read that report and people will like those recommendations and something might happen. Now that's obviously a lot of ifs, but politics is the world of the ifs, and you've got to have that kind of entrepreneurial drive and that real belief in the buy-in of the mission of what you want to achieve and what the think tank and the organisation that you work for wants to achieve. Also, just practically, you work with a lot of really interesting people who do a lot of really good work, and there's always interesting discussions going on and debates, and you have meetings with politicians, you have meetings with senior civil servants, with stakeholders across the country and beyond, and that's super enjoyable to just work with really talented people who are as passionate about their policy areas as you are, and you all have a shared organisational mission and drive to get that impact.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to hear from all of you. My name is Sabrina. I am originally from the United States, which is where I did my undergraduate degree. I studied comms and business. And then I worked in family philanthropy and corporate philanthropy for several years, and then did a stint at a ski resort just for fun. And then I ended up coming to the UK to do my master's degree. And so that's how I ended up here. I did my master's in social innovation and entrepreneurship. One of my professors towards the end of my degree sent out a job listing for a researcher role at NPC, and I applied, and I feel really grateful to have gotten it. NPC is a think tank and an impact consultancy, so we do a lot of think tank work, but we also do some consultancy projects, which keeps things really interesting. We do a lot of work with charities and funders, and then a lot of think tank work on openness, a ton on impact and what that looks like in the sector, and a lot of just open thinking about different issues kind of across the charity and even the social enterprise sort of sector. I I'm really happy to be in the UK. It's different for me. I don't have a lot of context because I didn't grow up here, and so that's been an interesting learning. But I feel like the think tank has actually been a really useful way for me to learn a lot about like the different systems and the different ways the government operates and things like that here. So I've been grateful for that quick learning. Some of the skills that I have learned that I've been able to draw on from my education, specifically that I use as a researcher now, is like has been mentioned, qualitative and quantitative research, of course. The ability to ask good questions, the ability to look at a data set and be able to demystify it, to figure out what you're trying to look at and learn. I think a huge one is the ability to ask for help. I have a lot of questions, and I feel like university humbled me in a lot of ways to ask questions, and so that's been helpful in the workplace. And then also just some of the skills I got from like work experience, which is like learning, to work with different people in different ways, as well as just creativity, a lot of storytelling. I think sometimes when you think of research, you think of it as like very dull, but it's actually really important to be able to tell a story. And so, having maybe different interests or different work experience. For example, my work at the ski resort, I worked on the marketing team, and I spent most of my time out on the mountain, like gathering content and telling stories, and that has actually translated really interestingly to my work, which has been really cool. So I think there are a lot of different skills that can make you marketable, so to speak, as a researcher. Obviously, you need research experience, but being able to articulate how some of your other skills can be used as a researcher or in the work that you're doing is really important and can help you stand out. And then the other thing that I have been thinking about or asked to touch on is the different sort of types of work that I've done at NPC. And so we do a lot of report writing at NPC. We've done reports for organizations that are closing their doors. And so that has required like qualitative research. So we'll talk to people that have been impacted by the organization or people that are currently working at the organization, gather the findings, and then create a report that will live on so that new commissioning bodies or new organizations that try to solve the social issue that they're working towards can have something to start from, so that all the work the organization has done, even though they have to close their doors, isn't lost. So that's a really interesting type of work. We do a lot of work for funders or specific philanthropists or charities that are looking to fund other charities. And they want to know like what kinds of organizations will make the biggest impact. What does that look like? And so we'll do desktop and qualitative research on like what kind of organizations they could fund. We do lots of case studies, which is like pulling together, different examples of certain methods that are put in practice for different social issues. So, like equitable housing and community cohesion, what does that actually look like? What is a good example of an organization doing that? How can I be more like that organization? And then one of the really cool things that we just worked on was we released a big report called Impact UK. And it was pretty bold, but it was the practice of sizing the impact economy in the UK. And that got a lot of traction, and it required quantitative, like gathering a lot of different data sets, pulling them together, as well as qualitative. It's also a storytelling report on some of the different organizations and individuals in the impact economy. And we also got to host an event to sort of, it was like a two-part event where we talked to philanthropists, but also launched the report, and MP Darren Jones was there and able to talk about the impact economy as he just became the lead of the Office for the Impact Economy. So that's been like a cool touch on government work. So we really have been able to like kind of expand across the sector.
Thank you, Serena. Now, last but not least, Daniel.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. My name is Dan. I'm a research assistant at the Institute for Government. You may have heard from my colleague Theodore in the previous session, but in case you didn't, I'll just run through what the IFG do. There's a little bit of overlap, I suppose, with the work that Demos do. We look at government, but specifically how it can be made more effective. So instead of maybe looking at what the government should do in terms of the policies that they put into play, it's more about the processes that they come up with those policies, the way that those policies are then enacted. So me personally, I'm splitting my time between the civil service and the public bodies teams. So looking at civil service reform, public body reform. You may have heard a lot of talk about quangos. So we look a lot about how to make public bodies more effective, what functions that they should carry out as part of the state, that sort of thing. My background, I'm from Cardiff originally, but I came to London to do my undergrad at UCL. A bit of an odd degree. I did arts and sciences, which is a little bit like a liberal arts degree, I suppose, but that kind of let me choose a bunch of different subjects, kind of customise my own degree. So I ended up doing philosophy, politics and maths, all of which have been really helpful in their own different ways at work. And I managed to find the IFG through a job listing on my university career site, and that's how I ended up there. I've been there for about 6 months now, really enjoying it. In terms of like an example of a project that I've worked on, I was quite lucky to be involved with this flagship publication that we have in the civil service team called Whitehall Monitor, which the IFG publishes every year. It's kind of a data-led analysis of the state of the civil service as a whole over the past year. It was my first week and they said, right, we're going to give you these chapters to work on. So it was kind of thrown in at the deep end, but a really good way to learn how the think tank sector works and also just how the civil service works. It's not something that I knew anything about before starting. So I would just reiterate what other people have said, is like you don't need to have sector specific knowledge, just like a curiosity and a passion to learn, I think is really the most important thing. This is quite a long report. It's about 150 pages, I think, in total, but lots of different people working on it. You might have ownership of one section, but you'll be peer reviewing other sections. People will be peer reviewing yours, and it's a really collaborative effort. So that's something that I really enjoy about the work that we do. In terms of skills developed, like working on this project and others, other people have said it a lot, but there's a real mix of qualitative and quantitative skills. So in terms of qualitative stuff, there's just like report writing, knowing your audience, trying to condense what can be like quite complicated policy areas into something that a policymaker or a journalist might read and will catch their attention. They're not going to want to read something really dense and kind of heavy. They want something that's like snappy and easy to digest. So knowing your audience is a really good skill that I've learned. In terms of the quantitative stuff, a big thing at the IFG and other think tanks as well, I'm sure, is this data visualization. So making sure that the quantitative insights that you can get are easy to digest, and that's like different charts, and thinking a bit more carefully about the way that you choose to present your data can make a really big impact. So that's something that I've really learned. I've also had an opportunity to develop my programming skills, which is something that I started as part of my undergraduate degree, but I've managed to kind of bring over into the public sector work area. Government publishes a lot of data, and very rarely will they analyse it themselves. So it's incumbent on us to do the analysis for them. So I've been using Python to, scrape some data from the government website and see what insights we can get into that. So it's been a real kind of whirlwind journey of learning these new skills and developing all these different ways of working. So really enjoying it, and would really recommend it as a sector if you're looking to get into your next steps after uni.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. So interesting to hear about everyone's different kind of backgrounds coming into similar roles in the sector. We've got some great questions coming in. Keep posting them, everyone. But I thought a good one to start with might be a question here. Someone's asked, what does the onboarding and training process look like for someone in an entry-level position, which I imagine we may have had fairly different experiences of. So does anyone want to jump in, or I can start with how it looks like here?
I'm happy to pick that one up, given that it wasn't that long ago for me, so I remember it quite well. So there's a lot of meetings in your first week, meeting all the different teams. So at the IFG, there's civil service and public bodies, which is me, but there's public service, public finances, devolution, ministers, and all of these teams are working on their own respective subject areas, so you get to go around and meet all of those. There's also the events team, the comms team, partnerships team, so it's really more than just research. So getting to know all those people is a big part of the onboarding process. I can only speak for the IFG, but I'm sure it's the same at other organisations. We have our own sort of in-house training programme, so that might be some self-guided study on house style, our data visualization principles, but then there'll also be classes. So we sat down with the in-house data science team. They talked us through some kind of principles of data just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. There's also some introduction to writing classes that we had. You know, this is the sort of things that we look for in tone. This is how you put a report together, but also kind of shorter things as well, like comment pieces and explainers, which are more short form content. So yeah, a real kind of fast-paced introduction to life at the think tank, but I found that really set me up well for my day-to-day work.
Nice, yeah. Similar here, I would say, like lots of meetings, like we have a chat with everyone to kind of like, you know, just a quick chat, get to know like what everyone's role is and what they do. Other process things, kind of learning about the style, how we kind of do certain things. And also at the Resolution Foundation, the kind of entry-level position, part of your role is to support the chief executive. So that's like working on the newsletter or presentations or briefings. And I think that's also a really kind of good way to get like up to speed with all the kind of research that we've been doing, like really quickly. So you're kind of absorbing all this information, which I found really like a really helpful way to kind of learn what was going on really quickly. What else? We also had a question from someone asking, how much autonomy do you get over the research questions you explore? Is this something that changes over our career? So I know we're all relatively early on, but like what are people's experiences, if any?
I'm happy to answer that question. I think within the apprenticeship, we kind of learn about actually the importance of the research question, how that actually formulates, obviously, the whole research that you do, the type of research, the qualitative or quantitative aspect that you take, because as IES, we're sort of commissioned to undertake research. Lots of our questions, I suppose, are in a way formulated by our clients, but also we get to kind of choose our approach, and I think it's so within IES, we choose how we might answer the question based on sort of what we want to know and what we want to get from the research. And I think, again, it spans back to that kind of trying to stay open-minded and think, right, what do we want to find out, and how are we going to formulate a research question that's going to be reflective, and gather the data that we need to collect. But yeah, it might be different in other organisations.
Yeah, I think there's a whole process, right? Well, at least at the Resolution Foundation, you kind of get opportunities to give your kind of thoughts, feedbacks throughout that, and yeah, can't speak to how it kind of gradually progresses over your career, but definitely it's like nice to be part of a process where you can kind of brainstorm ideas, which is always a good way to start out. We've got another question, which is something we hadn't touched on, which was about whether we take part in media, and if so, what kind of support do you get?
I mean, there's things like this, right? Discounts of media, I think it does. Obviously, a lot of the outputs of research work that we do is media in a sense, right? So that's the report itself is the kind of like classic output of research, but also a lot of the time it's blogs or guest articles. I had an article in LBC last week, like kind of going along with some research that we published last Thursday.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we do have that kind of thing. In terms of support, I mean, at think tanks, lots of, probably most of your colleagues have been in situations that you've been in before. And that's true when it comes to things like taking part in media, but also when it comes to like other practical aspects of the work we do in research, is you're working with people who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. So I definitely did get a lot of support, for example, when I was doing that. Generally, I think for public-facing outputs, there's often like a review process. I assume it's the same for most think tanks. But that doesn't mean that you don't have like still quite a lot of autonomy in if it's your voice and your name on a piece, then you ultimately your voice will reflect through that, and you can kind of hear different people's voices in different reports and different blogs and things. But it's important to make sure that it's cohesive and that the organisational mission as a whole is still being put forward.
Yeah, I think at the IFG, just to add to that, as a rule, it's not the entry-level people who will appear like on the news, for example, which I think kind of makes a lot of sense. It's usually the senior staff in the team who have been working in that area for much longer who will do media appearances on the news or the radio, for example. But like Aidan said, we're perfectly entitled to go and talk in the media. So we'll post on Blue Sky and LinkedIn quite a lot about new reports, and people will ask questions and we will reply to those. I mentioned Whitehall Monitor, this big report earlier. We've got some events coming up, so I'm going to be speaking on another panel there, and that will be open to the public. So there are opportunities for people, for whatever stage your career is at, to appear in the media. And at the IFG, there is like a comprehensive support package for media training. Not that I've received it as of yet, because I'm not expected to go on to the news. But for more senior colleagues, they're well briefed and well prepared for what an appearance on the news might entail.
I think I would also add that even though, at least at NPC, even though more senior leaders are the ones that appear on the news or do like the leading interviews, I feel like the people that write the research do a lot of work in briefing them and preparing them for that. And so that is definitely a critical role in media work, to have somebody that has the answers to the questions and can prepare other people for those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. We've had quite a few questions about like what kind of degree do you hold, which modules do you think helped most? We heard earlier that a master's degree is not a necessary prerequisite to get into think tanks, but everyone on the panel so far has said they'd done a master's degree. Would you say that's reflective of who think tanks are hiring, or do bachelor's degrees suffice?
Just to clarify, I don't have a master's degree. I just came straight from undergrad. The other cohort of starters with me, I think there were 6 of us that started at the same time. I think there might be 2, maybe even just 1 master's degree. Everybody else is straight out of undergrad, and obviously on the degree apprenticeship. So
yeah, I think as well with the degree apprenticeship, there's no expectation of any prior knowledge. So some people on my course have done degrees. I think they've recently changed the kind of application process now, so you're not actually able to have done a degree before. I think the point of that is because lots of people that are entering have done degrees can actually go into research. As lots of you guys said, you've done different degrees in different areas, and not necessarily research focused. So I think the point of certainly the social research degree apprenticeship is the opportunity for you to do a degree initially with no prior knowledge, to actually build understandings of the different breadths of research thoroughly. And again, all about kind of keeping that open mind and being really open to opportunities to kind of learn within the course, within work, all the time. So I think, obviously doing a degree is great, but also if you're watching and you haven't done a degree, then maybe the degree apprenticeship could be sort of a suitable route for you.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think the reason that I did a master's degree was that I hadn't learned up to that point the kind of quantitative skills that I knew that I wanted to develop to kind of do this kind of job. But that, had I done an undergraduate degree or a different scheme that had given me those skills, I think you could have been in the same position to apply to a job like this. So definitely not a prerequisite, and kind of maybe would definitely recommend kind of more thinking around like what skills do I need to do the kind of job that I want to apply for. We've had also questions about research or what research or statistical methods are most frequently used and most valuable for candidates to know. Could you name a few methods? And also someone asking kind of about quantitative data analysis and whether like SPSS or software like R and Python are better. So I don't know if anyone wanted to pick up on that.
So yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. I do most of my coding in Python, but that is purely because I did it as an undergrad. I know that there are people in the Institute who are working in R. I think the vast majority of the people at the Institute for Government don't code, and it's not something that is a prerequisite at all. We're actually running a boot camp at the moment for all staff if they're interested in learning. So it's just like Python fundamentals, but that's something that you can definitely pick up on the job. In terms of statistical methods, for the most part, it's fairly rudimentary. So not to get too technical, but just like ordinary least squares regressions, but you probably would have seen that already. But again, just to reiterate, this is kind of few and far between. Most of the reports wouldn't even draw on that. These are just very specialized use cases, and you would only really reach for a technical method like that if you thought, actually, this is going to tell me something really interesting and really useful that is going to add depth to my report. There are several, outputs that the IFG does that are not quantitative, not statistical at all. So, yeah, don't panic if you're from like a humanities or social science background. Those skills are just as valued, and I wouldn't want anyone to feel put off by kind of daunting kind of statistical methodologies. It's not all about that.
Yeah, I think building on what you said, Dan, I think my preference is more sort of qualitative research over sort of more statistical analysis and quantitative data. I think because you're kind of looking at two different sides of research, you're looking at sort of quantitative data, which is maybe sort of looking to collect more about sort of numbers and predictions and things, whereas you've also got the qualitative side, which maybe is interested in looking at a smaller population, but collecting more in-depth experiences and sort of unique data specific to certain groups. And again, I think you're collecting different types of data which hold different purposes as well. So I think, often it's sort of dependent on the research project and the participants that you're dealing with, and also kind of what you want to get out of the research.
And that's the benefit of having when you have different colleagues with different skills, right? If you have people who are quantitative experts and people who are more on the qualitative side, you can use both those methods.
Definitely. And I think when it comes to kind of between particular types of software, like I learned R in my degree, but we mainly use Stata here, and that is the kind of the actual process of coding and like that analysis. Once you've learned that, you can then apply that to a different type of software like more easily. So definitely kind of lots of experience is valid. And
I would say Excel is always helpful. Knowing your way, obviously it's not a software like that, but knowing your way around Excel is always helpful.
So true.
Yeah.
I've learned so much about Excel since I started it. We had a question about what does a typical day look like? Is it a lot of independent research work, or does it vary day to day? And do you work on multiple projects simultaneously?
Yeah, so I mean, on the research side, there's lots of different things going on, and I definitely work on multiple projects at the same time. On the research side, that can be doing some quant stuff, looking at spreadsheets and data sets, interviews with experts. It can be kind of brainstorming within a team. It can be focus groups or like deliberative workshops, what we often do, where we get kind of representative samples of the public in certain areas. So those kind of things will go on. Then you've got impact work. So that can be, we talked about media appearances and stuff, that would come into that, and the writing side. But also, maybe even more important than the media stuff, is doing like private briefings, one-on-one with senior civil servants or with politicians, ministers, etc., and getting the messaging across.
That's great. I have just noticed the time. Had such a great chat that we're pretty much at time, so unless anyone has anything kind of absolutely need to say, then we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for all the speakers on the panel. Thank you to everyone that's been listening. Thank you to all the speakers that we heard earlier today. And I will finish with one more mention of, please, anyone watching, if you're able to fill out our equal opportunities monitoring form. It's really helpful for us to know that we're kind of reaching everyone that we want to reach with this event. You'll find the link further down the page wherever you're watching this. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone.